On December 6, 2024, at exactly 9:12 p.m., officers were dispatched to a quiet residential street in the West Briar district after a 17-year-old girl was found unresponsive in her bedroom. Her mother reported hearing a heavy thud, followed by silence. When officers arrived, paramedics were already working to stabilize the teenager. Her breathing was shallow, and she was barely responding. One officer stepped back from the doorway, lowered his voice, and said to another, "How did he get this far? She's the third one." It wasn't a casual remark. It wasn't confusion. It was recognition, the kind that comes from seeing a case resurface in a way no one wanted. The paramedics moved quickly, loading the girl onto a stretcher and rushing her to County General Hospital. No one outside her family knew anything about the other two girls. No one knew this call was connected to something deeper inside the school district. Only one of the three lived long enough to reveal the truth, but even she didn't understand how much danger she was in. The officers didn't release names. They didn't explain their comment. They didn't hint at the history behind it. To the neighbors watching from their porches, it looked like a medical emergency. To the mother in the ambulance, it looked like her worst fear unfolding. To the officers who whispered in that hallway, it was the moment they knew a hidden pattern had surfaced again. Nothing about the scene revealed what tied the three girls together. Not their families, not their backgrounds, not their social circles. The connection was a person, someone the community trusted, respected, and defended for years. The girl taken from the house that night was the only one who survived long enough to speak. She didn't yet know what happened to the others. She didn't know how closely her story followed theirs. And she didn't know the man who had access to all three of them was already the focus of a quiet internal investigation. This case didn't begin with her collapse. It didn't begin with the officers at her door. It began months earlier, inside a school building where a man with authority moved without suspicion or oversight. The question that officer whispered, the one caught on camera by mistake, became the doorway into everything that follows. How did he get this far? Welcome to True Crime Story HQ. Thanks to all my viewers and subscribers for your support. Stay tuned for daily true crime updates. Don't forget to subscribe. West Briar Unified School District wasn't known for problems. It wasn't a failing system, and it wasn't under investigation. It was an ordinary American district, busy enough to stay stretched thin, but stable enough that parents trusted it without hesitation. Counselors carried caseloads far beyond what their training ever prepared them for. Teachers worked double shifts, taking on roles that went far outside academics. Parents depended on the schools to provide structure, guidance, and mentorship. In communities like this, schools are more than learning centers. They become second homes for thousands of children. And in a district like this, titles carry weight. When someone earns awards, speaks on stages, and becomes the face of student success, people take their word without question. Respect replaces scrutiny. Trust replaces oversight. That environment is what allowed the cracks to form. The high school's principal, Dr. Lavarian Holt, was given full control of several student programs, one of them being Horizon Pathways, a mentorship initiative he created himself. No co-leaders, no outside supervisors, no required reporting structure. His office door was often closed. His meetings with students were unscheduled, undocumented, and rarely challenged. Teachers assumed he was helping. Counselors believed he was stepping in where workload made them slow to respond. Parents viewed him as the strongest figure in the district. Over time, the patterns that now seem obvious were dismissed. Students regularly pulled from class without explanation. Certain teens meeting with him after hours. Private conversations he insisted were personal guidance. A mentorship program only he oversaw. A reputation strong enough to silence any suspicion before it ever formed. No one imagined that these same details would later become evidence. Back then they were seen as dedication, nothing more. In districts where trust is automatic, danger can move quietly. No one expected the most celebrated educator to be the most dangerous. Before anyone understood what was happening in West Briar Unified, they knew one name more than any other, Dr. Lavarian Holt. 45 years old, African American. always in a pressed suit, shoes polished, tie matched to the season. He moved through the school with a confidence that made people step aside without thinking. He spoke calmly, rarely raised his voice, and knew how to make parents feel as if their children were in the best hands possible. His reputation was built long before the first investigation ever touched his name. Dr. Holt was the kind of administrator districts hold up as proof they're doing something right. He won Principal of the Year in 2022. He appeared at youth conferences as a motivational speaker. Local news stations brought him on for short pieces about student success. Churches invited him to talk about family leadership, discipline, and marriage. Parents described him as a man who could fix any troubled student just by spending time with them. At school board meetings, his presence carried weight. When he spoke, people listened. He didn't talk much, just enough to remind everyone that he understood the district better than anyone in the room. The public saw the polished version. Inside the school, staff members saw a different pattern, something that didn't appear dangerous at first, just unusual. He was extremely private. He avoided group decisions, preferring to handle issues on his own. Few people were allowed into his office unless he invited them. He didn't like suggestions, and he shut down opposing opinions with a calm firmness that ended most discussions. Counselors whispered to each other that he got too involved in students' personal lives, not in a loud or aggressive way, just deeper than an administrator normally would. Teachers said there were times they felt uneasy but couldn't explain why. He knew too much about certain students. He followed up even when no one asked him to. He positioned himself as the problem solver in situations that didn't require his involvement. Yet every concern faded quickly, because there was never any evidence. No written complaint. No reportable incident. Nothing concrete enough to challenge a principal with awards, influence, and community backing. Parents supported him. Church leaders praised him. The district highlighted him in newsletters. And when a man is treated like an asset, questioning him becomes uncomfortable, sometimes even unthinkable. How do you confront a man everyone considers a gift to the district? That question would become central to this entire case. By the time anyone asked it out loud, it was already too late. Before the district ever connected the dots, the first name that should have raised concern was Naomi Sanders. She was 18, lived with her aunt because her mother struggled with addiction. Quiet, respectful. The kind of student adults describe as sweet because she never pushed back. Teachers said she apologized even when she hadn't done anything wrong. Counselors recalled she rarely made eye contact. Staff noticed she stayed late in the building long after most students went home. Those traits didn't alarm anyone, but they caught the attention of one person. Dr. Holt had a habit of scanning for students who seemed detached or unsure of themselves. With Naomi, he noticed small things. She lowered her head when adults spoke. She apologized repeatedly. She lingered after classes instead of going straight home. In a school full of loud personalities and busy hallways, a girl like Naomi faded into the background. Holt saw that immediately. He started small. Encouragement, extra attention, telling her she had potential no one else recognized. He put her on the planning committee for school events, a responsibility she felt proud to have. Then he chipped away at her support system. He asked teachers to keep an eye on her for academic stress. He told counselors she needed extra guidance. He isolated her without making it look intentional. Slowly, he positioned himself as the one adult she could rely on. The next step was more deliberate. He offered rides home during cold evenings. He framed it as protection. Her aunt assumed he was helping. One afternoon, Naomi stayed after school for more than 2 hours. A janitor making his rounds noticed Holt's office door closed, which wasn't unusual, but the time was. He knocked. The door opened only a few inches. Holt appeared irritated, caught off guard. The encounter lasted maybe 3 seconds, but the janitor remembered how Naomi's voice sounded inside the room. Quiet, shaky, not her usual tone. He didn't report anything. Not enough information. Not enough reason to. But later, that moment would become a critical point in the timeline. Naomi learned she was pregnant in February 2021. When she confronted Holt, He didn't react with panic. He responded with control. He told her, "This must stay between us. No one will protect you the way I do. They will blame you, not me." Statements designed to trap her, not support her. 2 months later, in April 2021, Naomi visited a health clinic after experiencing persistent fatigue and nausea. Her test came back positive for HIV. The news devastated her. She withdrew from her friends, stopped participating in school activities, turned in assignments late. Teachers noticed the change but assumed it was due to family issues. Her diary contained one line investigators later highlighted in red. "I trusted him. I don't know how to live with this." On July 18, 2021, Naomi was found near a creek just outside town. Her shoes were still clean. There were no signs of struggle. Her death was ruled an accidental drowning. People accepted the explanation because nothing about her life seemed connected to violence. Months later, digital forensics showed her phone held several deleted message threads, all from one number, Dr. Holtz. But the deletions occurred close together, too close to be random, and too close to her death to be coincidence. Someone cleaned her digital history. But who had that access? Naomi's case faded quietly into the district's background. Her name didn't resurface until investigators began looking into the next student. And by then, it was almost a year too late. After Naomi's death faded quietly into the background, the next student drawn into Holt's reach was Amara Lewis, age 17. She lived with both parents, Marcus and Evelyn Lewis, in a stable home. Her family was known in the community, church-going, hard-working, no criminal history. They believed deeply in education, and Amara was their pride. Straight-A student, volunteered in the school's peer tutoring program, often helped teachers after class. She avoided conflict, trusted adults easily, and always followed instructions. Her family described her as reliable, grounded, and focused on college. She spoke often about scholarships, wanting to relieve the financial pressure on her parents. That dream became the opening Holt used. To most staff members, Amara didn't appear vulnerable. To Holt, her vulnerability came from a different place. She wanted scholarship guidance. She believed adults acted in her best interest. She avoided confrontation. She responded strongly when praised. She wasn't looking for emotional rescue like Naomi. She was looking for academic direction, something he had the authority to provide. Her parents trusted him instantly. When Holt complimented Amara during parent-teacher meetings, the family took it as honesty, not manipulation. Holt approached Amara through academics, reviewing her personal statements, offering scholarship leads, assigning her leadership roles in Horizon Pathways, positioning himself as essential to her future. To staff, the attention looked appropriate. To her parents, it looked like mentorship. No one suspected anything deeper. In October 2021, Amara discovered she was pregnant. She didn't tell her family. She didn't confide in friends. Her school involvement changed overnight. Her mother later said Amara would come home quieter, eating less, spending more time in her room. The family assumed stress, not crisis. During a clinic visit in March 2022 for fatigue and nausea, she tested positive for HIV. A nurse recalled she froze when she heard the result. She sat in the hallway for nearly half an hour. She wouldn't call home. She wouldn't move. She kept saying, "I can't tell anyone." Her parents noticed changes. Long showers, trembling hands, lost appetite, sleepless nights. They tried talking to her. She insisted she was fine. Her father assumed senior year pressure. Her mother suggested counseling. But when the principal himself reached out to the family, saying Amara seemed overworked and needed some schedule flexibility, they saw him as supportive, not strategic. They didn't know she was keeping a secret that tied directly to him. In the months before her death, Amara left behind scattered notes later found in her room and backpack. "I can't tell anyone. He checks on me too much. Please don't let him know." Her parents didn't see these until police showed them. On June 14, 2022, neighbors reported a burning vehicle near a residential street. Inside was Amara. A neighbor mentioned hearing arguing near the car earlier in the night, voices he couldn't identify. Because the fire seemed accidental, no one connected the argument to the death. Investigators classified it as a vehicle malfunction. The next morning, Holt spoke at the school's assembly, comforting students as if he were grieving with them. Parents later said they appreciated how personally invested he was. Amara's family never suspected him. No one did. Her parents buried their daughter believing it was a tragic accident. They didn't learn the truth until much later. 2 students gone, both linked to him, and still no investigation began. As investigators later reviewed school records, one staff member's recollection stood out: the school nurse. She remembered both Naomi Sanders and Amara Lewis visiting her office months apart, long before anyone linked their names. Neither girl came in with injuries. Neither reported bullying. Both complained about the same 3 symptoms: persistent fatigue, dizziness, nausea. The nurse did what she always did when symptoms repeated. She suggested each girl get medical testing outside the school. What caught her attention later wasn't the symptoms themselves. It was how their absences were handled. In both cases, whenever the girls missed school for medical reasons, the only person excusing those absences was Dr. Holt, not their parents, not the attendance office, not counseling staff. Holt. He signed off on every missed day. He noted approved appointment or cleared by administration. No questions, no follow-up from anyone above him. At the time, the nurse assumed he was helping the families. In districts with heavy workloads, administrators often step in to handle paperwork. But when she later learned the girls had shared similar symptoms, similar absences, and similar undocumented meetings with the principal, her concern sharpened. She told detectives that if the cases had been viewed together earlier, the pattern would have been obvious: fatigue, nausea, dizziness, clinic referrals, administrative clearance by the same man. None of this was identified while the girls were alive. No one brought the pieces together. As the case widened, detectives began examining Holt's background: employment files, disciplinary reports, certification records. Nothing suggested misconduct. His professional history looked clean. The turning point came when investigators obtained Holt's medical records after securing proper warrants. Those documents revealed information no one at the district had ever known. He had been diagnosed HIV positive in 2018. His care pattern was unusual from the beginning. Instead of using local clinics near his home, Holt filled prescriptions in another county 40 minutes away. He never stayed with one provider long. Medication refills were spaced irregularly, and he repeatedly declined follow-up counseling. Detectives noted that he had signed a standard state-issued form acknowledging his legal responsibility to disclose his status to sexual partners. There was no ambiguity. He understood the law. He understood the consequences of non-disclosure. This wasn't forgetfulness. It wasn't confusion. It was intentional avoidance. When reviewing his file, a specific note written by a clinic staffer stood out: "Patient refuses to answer questions about sexual partners." The entry was dated early 2019, months after his diagnosis, long before any student complaint, long before the deaths. Investigators realized 2 things. First, Holt worked in a building with hundreds of teenagers, students who viewed him as a mentor, students who trusted him because the district encouraged that trust. Second, the failure to disclose wasn't an isolated lapse. It was a consistent pattern stretching back years. The deeper detectives went, the clearer it became that the risk wasn't limited to the 2 girls already identified. Holt had access to dozens of students, especially those involved in his mentorship program. His medical file changed the tone of the investigation completely. It wasn't just about misconduct or boundary violations. It was about someone with full knowledge of his condition, who concealed it while maintaining unrestricted access to minors. With one document, investigators realized the danger was far larger than expected. The 3rd student was nothing like the first 2. Her name was Zariah Coleman, age 17. She lived with her mother and her 11-year-old brother in a small duplex on the east side of the district. She worked part-time as a cashier at a neighborhood grocery store to help with family bills. She was sharp, outspoken, quick to challenge what didn't make sense. Teachers described her as intelligent but strong-willed. Her mother said she had been independent since she was 10. Even classmates admitted she didn't blend in. She stood out. Her first encounter with Holt happened after an argument with a teacher during a group project. It wasn't a major incident, but the teacher wrote it up as disrespect. Normally, assistant principals handled discipline. This time, Holt requested the meeting himself. He sat across from her, calm, steady. He didn't follow the usual script. Instead of focusing on the disagreement, he asked personal questions: how she was doing at home, why she worked after school, why she reacted strongly to authority. Zaria told her mother later that the meeting felt strange, but she brushed it off. She assumed he was just trying to understand her. Unlike Naomi and Amara, Zaria didn't avoid eye contact. She didn't shrink when spoken to. She questioned everything. She wasn't intimidated by adults. Her personality made her different. She challenged rules. She confronted authority. She read people quickly. She had a rebellious edge that made her hard to influence. To most administrators, she was a student who needed guidance. To Holt, she was more than that. She was intriguing. Her independence made her harder to manipulate. It also made her more dangerous to him later. Holt adjusted his approach. With Naomi, he used emotional rescue. With Amara, academic promises. With Zaria, he tried something else. He positioned himself as the only adult who understood her perspective. He said she had leadership potential. He told her she could go into digital media or communications. He offered access to equipment in the school's media room that no other student received without approval. He framed it as opportunity. She accepted because access to those tools aligned with what she wanted to study after graduation. There were no signs of weakness in her behavior. No isolation. No hesitation. But the closeness built slowly. In August 2023, she realized she was pregnant. She didn't shut down like the first two girls. She didn't withdraw. But she didn't know how to tell her mother either. She considered it several times. Each time she stopped short of saying the words. HIV diagnosis. A month later, in September 2023, she visited a community clinic after experiencing prolonged fatigue. The HIV test came back positive. Staff reported she didn't cry or panic at first. She walked to the restroom and closed the door. After 10 minutes, they heard her break down. She left the clinic alone, without asking anyone for help. Something unique about her. Zaria did what neither Naomi nor Amara had done. She started looking into Holt. She searched the school's old program flyers for Horizon pathways. She went through Instagram posts, tagged at the school's events. She checked which students he mentored most often. That's when she noticed the pattern. Both Naomi and Amara had been part of the same program Holt managed alone. Both had private meetings with him. Both had sudden behavioral changes. Both died. Her journal contained one-line investigators would later highlight, "If they're gone, I might be next." She didn't tell her mother everything. She didn't go to the police. She didn't go to the school. Instead, she kept gathering information quietly, trying to understand how deep the issue went and whether anyone would believe her. Zaria was the first student to see the pattern the adults missed. She recognized the connection before anyone else, and once Holt realized she was pulling away, the danger increased. In August 2023, the district hired a new school counselor, Ms. Kendall Reeves, a recent transfer from another county. Her workload was heavy from the first week. New students, scheduling issues, academic plans. But even with the pressure, one student immediately stood out, Zaria Coleman. At first, it wasn't anything dramatic. It was the accumulation of small behaviors that didn't match who Zaria was known to be. Ms. Reeves noticed Zaria's anxiety spike suddenly during the first month of school. Assignments she used to complete easily were now late or missing. Her focus dropped. She avoided after-school activities she used to volunteer for, and each time Ms. Reeves tried to call her in, Zaria seemed distracted, always watching the hallway, always in a rush to leave. Another detail bothered her even more. Holt frequently pulled Zaria from class. Not once a week. Not for documented discipline or guidance sessions. Just quiet removals that didn't go through counseling or attendance. Teachers mentioned it casually, assuming it was mentorship. But Ms. Reeves had been in enough districts to know the difference between academic support and inappropriate access. By mid-September, the changes became sharper. Zariah's grades dropped across multiple subjects. She started leaving school grounds quickly, barely speaking to anyone. She declined leadership roles she once pursued. She looked exhausted. When asked if everything was all right, she always answered the same way. "I'm fine. Just tired." Most staff accepted that answer. Ms. Reeves didn't. The breakdown. On October 12, 2023, Zariah walked into Ms. Reeves's office without an appointment. She looked overwhelmed, hands shaking, breathing shallow, eyes restless. She sat down but didn't speak. After nearly a minute of silence, she reached into her backpack and pulled out a folded piece of notebook paper. She didn't look at the counselor when she handed it to her. "This is all I have," she said quietly. Inside the note were Holt's personal phone number, a list of dates and times, undisclosed meetings, a short timeline of their interactions over the year, and one sentence written at the bottom. "If anything happens to me, he did it." For a counselor, that kind of note is not optional. It triggers immediate procedural steps: documentation, reporting, consultation with administrators, and, in many districts, law enforcement notification. Ms. Reeves didn't wait. She locked her office door, secured the note, and contacted the district mental health supervisor. She didn't know the full story, but she knew enough to act. It was the first time an adult stepped into this timeline with urgency. For the first time, someone took action. Everything that followed began with that one folded note. The turning point in the case didn't come from a public outcry or a staff report. It came from something far quieter. An anonymous tip to Child Protective Services just weeks after Ms. Reeves escalated concerns about Zariah. The tip didn't include names. It didn't mention the full scope of what was happening. It simply stated that a high school principal was having inappropriate contact with a female student, and that the student was afraid something might happen to her. The vagueness might have halted the case under normal circumstances, but CPS flagged it as high priority due to the mention of fear and because it involved a school employee. By policy, they forwarded the information to the county's Special Victims Division. That was when detectives quietly stepped in. Detectives begin discreet surveillance. The detectives assigned to the case, two veteran investigators with experience in school-related offenses, didn't approach Holt directly. They began with quiet, unobtrusive monitoring. They observed his arrival and departure times. They tracked who he spoke with on campus. They watched his interactions with students, noting how often he requested private conversations. Holt had no idea investigators were watching him. At least not yet. Investigators next requested badge entry logs from the district, records of when Holt used his access card to enter restricted areas, including administrative corridors, the media lab, student resource rooms, conference rooms, his locked office. The logs revealed something subtle but important. On numerous evenings, Holt entered the building long after faculty left. He accessed conference rooms that had no scheduled meetings. He used his office at hours when only janitorial staff were present. No documentation matched these entries. This irregular activity wasn't criminal on its own, but it raised questions. Why did a principal need extended, unsupervised access so often? And why were several of these late entries on dates that lined up with Naomi's and Amara's absences? The logs didn't give answers, but they added weight to the concerns already forming. Next, detectives examined attendance data for Naomi and Amara, records that hadn't been scrutinized when the girls were alive. The pattern they saw was difficult to ignore. Sudden clusters of excused absences. Multiple days marked approved by administration. Notes written only by Holt. No parental calls to confirm any of the absences. No documentation from counselors. Both girls had remarkably similar attendance disruptions leading up to their deaths. It was the first concrete parallel. Investigators wrote in their early report, Absence patterns between students are consistent and tied exclusively to administrative clearance by Holt. Still not proof, but more weight on the same side of the scale. To understand the nature of the case, detectives needed medical confirmation. Because both Naomi and Amara were deceased, their medical records required a court order. The judge approved it due to the emerging concerns. The results were disturbing. Both girls had been tested for HIV around the same period. Both had received their diagnoses months before their deaths. Neither had documented chronic conditions prior. Investigators now saw a deeper issue forming. Two girls, same program, same principal, same medical diagnosis, same pattern of behavior shifts, same secrecy, same absence patterns. This was no longer coincidence, but they needed something more concrete to justify an official confrontation. GPS analysis, a new angle. When investigators accessed Holt's phone records with proper warrants, they performed a GPS location history review. The findings were impossible to overlook. His device pinged near Naomi's aunt's home 2 days before her drowning. His device pinged near Amara's home 3 nights before the vehicle fire. The times didn't match official work duties. There were no school-related events, no documented home visits, no required parent conferences. The locations weren't exact coordinates, but the radius was close enough to raise immediate alarm. One detective wrote in his notes, "Presence near both locations during sensitive time frames cannot be ignored." Even then, they were careful. GPS data can be challenged. Patterns can be misinterpreted. Without direct evidence tying him to the deaths, the case couldn't move to arrest. But the picture was forming quickly. The moment investigators say the word pattern. It was during a late-night case review that one detective finally said, "This is a pattern." It was the first time anyone formally acknowledged it. 3 students, 1 program, 1 administrator, 2 unexplained deaths, 1 living student expressing fear, 2 HIV cases tied to his timeline, attendance irregularities, GPS overlaps, administrative clearance without verification. The dots weren't just close, they were touching. But still missing one thing: proof. Despite all this, investigators lacked direct evidence linking Holt to the pregnancies, the infections, or the deaths. Nothing placed him physically with Naomi or Amara at the moment they died. Nothing documented illegal contact. Nothing in his files provided a confession. No witness had stepped forward with first-hand knowledge. The case was strong in suspicion, but weak in legally admissible evidence. That gap forced detectives to move slowly, quietly, without alerting Holt too early. But while investigators tried to stay discreet, Holt sensed a shift. He noticed staff whispering more. He saw unexpected district officials entering campus. He observed subtle changes in how people interacted with him. And when a man used to total control senses the ground shifting beneath him, he becomes unpredictable. And she knew it was closing in. Those were the last words Zaria wrote before the day the entire case took a new turn. By late October 2023, Holt's behavior toward her had escalated beyond watching from a distance. He began interfering directly with her daily routine. Teachers reported seeing him standing near her classroom door, waiting for the bell to ring. He intercepted her in hallways without scheduling any official meetings. He questioned her attendance decisions, even when she had legitimate reasons to be absent. What changed next was subtle but significant. Zaria didn't know at the time that Holt had begun asking questions about the new counselor, Ms. Kendall Reeves. He approached administrative staff to ask whether she had filed any recent reports. He checked counseling schedules without explanation. He asked the assistant principal if anyone had raised concerns about him. These inquiries were flagged later, but at the time, no one considered them unusual. On October 27th, something happened that forced investigators to shift into active mode. Zaria was leaving school after a tutoring session. Her mother planned to pick her up. Surveillance cameras later showed Holt's vehicle already parked near the exit. Engine running, driver's side window lowered. He called her over. She didn't approach. He said something through the window. Camera audio didn't pick it up. She stepped back, shook her head, and pulled out her phone. Seconds later, she ran across the lot to her mother's car. Holt drove off immediately. Zaria didn't go home silently. She told her mother she didn't feel safe and that something was wrong with the principal. It was the first time she had spoken openly. Her mother called Ms. Reeves that evening, and that call triggered everything that followed. When Ms. Reeves heard the concern, she followed district protocol. She documented the report. She emailed the district mental health supervisor. She notified the school's administrative investigator. She prepared a statement based on Zariah's previous note. She didn't accuse Holt directly. She simply followed procedure. It was enough. Within 24 hours, the district contacted county detectives, who had already been quietly monitoring Holt. The new information aligned with their ongoing surveillance. This was no longer a case of discreet observation. This was a potential active threat. Detectives moved quickly to protect Zaria without alerting the school. They called her mother for a private meeting and gathered the timeline note, locker messages, the clinic diagnosis, Zaria's journal entries, details from the parking lot encounter. They now had multiple indicators of danger. For the first time, they weren't just reviewing records. They were dealing with a living victim in immediate risk. That same week, Holt's behavior shifted again. He stopped avoiding staff. He started watching everyone more carefully, especially the counseling team. He checked attendance charts aggressively. He questioned clerical staff about random audits he claimed the district was doing, and he avoided Ms. Reeves altogether. Predators under pressure don't always lash out violently at first. Sometimes they become very still, watching, calculating. From this point forward, detectives considered Zariah's safety time-sensitive. The moment she told one adult the truth, Holt understood he was losing the only weapon he ever relied on: silence. Everything after this point becomes a race between a frightened teenager trying to stay alive and a man desperate to regain control. The only weapon he ever relied on: silence. That was the moment everything changed for Zariah Coleman. Once she realized Holt knew she had spoken to someone, she understood the danger wasn't distant anymore. It was immediate. For the first time, she stopped reacting and started preparing. She didn't feel safe going to administrators. She didn't feel safe going home with the full truth. And she didn't feel safe confronting Holt. So she chose the only path she trusted: document everything. In the weeks that followed, Zaria began building what became the central evidence in the entire investigation. She didn't know whether she would survive long enough to use it. She just knew someone needed proof of what he was doing. She started quietly, gathering small pieces. Screenshots of missed calls, screenshots of unsent voice messages from Holt, photos of notes left in her locker, images of hallway locations where he waited for her, time-stamped logs of encounters. She hid everything in a locked folder on her phone, labeled with a different name to avoid suspicion. Her classmates later said she looked more serious, more alert, watching doorways and hallways the way someone does when they feel followed. One of the most significant items she captured came by accident. Holt approached her near the back stairwell of the school, one of the few areas without constant foot traffic. She sensed it coming, opened her phone, and tapped record before he reached her. The recording was brief, but it was the first indicator of a direct threat. Holt's voice was low, controlled, almost calm. He told her, "You're confused right now. You're letting the wrong people talk to you. You need to come see me before things go bad." It wasn't a clear threat, but detectives later identified the tone as purposeful, meant to intimidate without stating anything explicit. Zaria labeled the recording Stairwell 1029. It became a major piece of the case. Her journal became another source of documentation. Every entry was dated. Every meeting was described, not in emotional language, but in plain notes. "He followed me to the front gate today. He asked if I've been talking to anyone outside school. He checked my attendance again. He asked why I'm ignoring him. He said I'm making things harder." The diary wasn't written for reflection. It was a record, the kind survivors create when they know no adult has stepped in fast enough. Zaria also began tracking his movements. She wrote down the rooms he entered without scheduled meetings, the hallways he stood in without reason, dates he pulled her from class, times he drove behind her bus, when he parked near her job, when he appeared during lunch periods, even though administrators rarely supervise those. She wasn't guessing anymore. She was collecting. This wasn't behavior of a child. It was behavior of someone who understood she was up against a grown man with power, credibility, and influence. Detectives later said her phone was one of the most useful devices they had ever recovered in a student-related case. Inside, they found photos of his vehicle outside her job, time-stamped screenshots of messages, Holt deleted, images of her locker notes, voice memos she recorded anytime she felt unsafe, a detailed timeline of every inappropriate contact, password-protected notes listing dates of her symptoms, her diagnosis, and Holt's reactions. One note read, "Clinic, 9:14. He asked if I told anyone. I didn't answer." Another, 11:2. He was parked near the bus stop again. And another, "He knows I'm avoiding him. He's watching more." On her phone screen in the Notes app, she saved one message as a pinned note at the top of her device. "If I don't make it, give this to the police." The note wasn't hidden. It wasn't coded. It was a direct statement of fear and foresight. She wrote it after the parking lot incident where she ran from Holt's vehicle. That day confirmed to her that he was no longer trying to conceal his behavior. Detectives would later say that without Zariah's documentation, the case against Holt would have remained a collection of circumstantial clues, serious, concerning, but not actionable enough for the level of intervention needed. Her screenshots, her recordings, her notes, her photos, and the pinned message on her phone formed the core of the case file that finally pushed investigators to escalate their involvement. Her evidence did what adults failed to do for years. It connected the timelines. It proved surveillance. It demonstrated intimidation. It confirmed her fear was justified. It linked behavior across multiple locations. It showed consistency with Naomi's and Amara's patterns. Her bravery became the backbone of the entire case. Zariah's documentation didn't just protect her. It exposed Holt in a way he could no longer control. And once investigators realized what she had captured, they also realized something else. They were running out of time, too. That line became more literal than investigators expected. December 6, 2023 became the most critical night in the entire case. It was the night Holt crossed the line from intimidation to direct action, an escalation detectives feared but weren't fast enough to prevent fully. What happened that evening was pieced together later through neighbor statements, time-stamped surveillance, digital forensics, and emergency response logs. The picture it formed was chillingly precise. 7:12 p.m., Holt leaves school. Early security cameras show Holt exiting the building earlier than his usual routine. He walked out with no bag, no files, and no explanation offered to the custodial staff. His car pulled away from the parking lot in a direction that did not match his home address. Investigators later confirmed he took a back route instead of the main road, a detail consistent with someone avoiding being recognized by staff leaving late. This early departure aligned exactly with the window detectives believed he would act, if pressured. 7:38 p.m. Neighbor spots Holt's car near Zariah's house. A neighbor across the street from the Coleman residence noticed a dark SUV idling a few houses down. She recognized the vehicle from school events, but didn't know the principal personally. What caught her attention was the way the car kept its headlights off and positioned itself partly behind a large oak tree. The engine stayed running. The driver did not step out. She later told detectives she assumed he was waiting for someone. The timestamp from her porch camera read 7:38 p.m. 7:42 p.m. Zariah's mother arrives home. At 7:42 p.m. exactly, Zariah's mother, Alicia Coleman, pulled into the driveway after a late shift. The first sign something was wrong was the front door left partially open. Inside the house, Zariah's phone was on the hallway floor. One shoe was near the living room. A glass cup was tipped over in the kitchen. Her backpack was unzipped, and the house was silent. The mother called out for her daughter repeatedly. No response. She walked straight to the bedroom and found Zaria collapsed on the floor, unconscious, but breathing. Alicia called 911 at 7:43 p.m., her voice shaking as dispatchers instructed her to check Zaria's pulse and breathing pattern. 7:47 p.m., neighbor's camera captures Holt speeding away. Exactly 4 minutes after Alicia's 911 call, the same neighbor's camera that recorded the idling SUV captured the vehicle leaving the street. This time the headlights were on. The car accelerated quickly, far above normal residential speed. The timestamp showed 7:47 p.m. That clip became a key piece of the reconstructed timeline. Investigators later confirmed the SUV's make, model, and small damage on the rear bumper matched Holt's vehicle. The plate number couldn't be captured clearly due to motion blur, but the outline matched. Cell tower data later placed Holt's phone within the same neighborhood radius between 7:35 p.m. and 7:48 p.m. Combined, these details were enough for detectives to start leaning toward attempted harm rather than intimidation. 8:04 p.m., paramedics revive. Her paramedics arrived on scene within minutes of the call. They found irregular breathing, rapid pulse, signs of intense stress response. No visible wounds, no drugs or alcohol present in the immediate area. She was revived at 8:04 p.m., documented in EMS logs. Zaria regained consciousness briefly in the ambulance. She was disoriented, confused, and unable to speak in full sentences. Emergency medical staff reported she attempted to sit up, but collapsed again. Her vitals were unstable. They transported her to County General Hospital under high observation. The emergency report noted, patient revived after collapse, cause undetermined, no visible trauma, possible acute shock response. Later toxicology panels found no substances, meaning whatever happened in that house wasn't chemical. It was fear, stress, or physical exertion during a confrontation. Investigators believed she may have attempted to fight or escape before collapsing. When detectives arrived, the scene raised more questions. A shoe dragged near the hallway. A lamp knocked over. Zaria's phone screen cracked. Her journal slightly pulled from under the bed. A small indentation on the carpet beside her window. There was no forced entry. Nothing stolen. Nothing broken beyond a few items knocked over. This aligned with a confrontation involving someone the victim knew, and someone who didn't need to break in. The key detail was the open front door, a sign of a rushed exit, not a burglary. GPS cross-confirmation investigators used Holt's phone records to reconstruct his movements. 7:11 p.m., phone leaves school tower. 7:28 p.m., pings near the East Side Highway ramp. 7:34 p.m., pings off a tower near the Coleman neighborhood. 7:45 p.m., phone begins moving south. 7:50 p.m., phone transitions to second tower on outbound route. 8:10 p.m., phone returns to general home region. The movements matched the neighbor footage almost perfectly. Holt later claimed he was running errands, but couldn't recall where. Detectives viewed that as deliberate evasion, not forgetfulness. When Zaria regained full consciousness hours later, she gave detectives one key statement: he was here. She didn't have to say a name. They understood immediately. Her words were weak, strained, and short, but they confirmed what investigators already suspected. The collapse was not random. It wasn't medical. It wasn't coincidental. It was an escalation. She survived. And because she survived, the investigation changed from quiet observation to an urgent pursuit. What happened on December 6th was no longer an isolated event. It became the catalyst for every action that followed. She survived. And because she survived, the investigation changed from quiet observation to an urgent pursuit. When detectives confirmed that Zaria Coleman had survived the encounter inside her home, they understood they were no longer dealing with a case of suspected misconduct. They were now dealing with a student who collapsed after a confrontation, a principal's vehicle leaving the neighborhood at a critical time, an active pattern connecting 3 minors, a survivor with direct statements, physical indicators inside the home, and months of documented intimidation. For detectives, this shifted the case from passive data collection to active legal preparation. They needed evidence, real evidence, that would hold in court. Not suspicion, not patterns, not concerns, proof. To do this, they divided the case into categories: digital evidence, forensic evidence, testimonial evidence, medical evidence, behavioral and timeline evidence, administrative and school records. Each category had to be airtight, cross-checked, time-stamped, and legally admissible. 1. Digital evidence, where the case became solid. A. Phone logs and messages. Detectives obtained a warrant for Holt's phone records. The logs revealed frequent calls to the same 3 minors, a pattern of late-night contact, several deleted message threads, several instances of him turning his phone off during key windows, repeated GPS location pings near the victims' homes. Phone carriers keep logs even when users delete their own messages. While they couldn't recover content, they could confirm frequency of contact, timing of contact, duration of calls, locations of both phones during communication. This alone did not prove criminal activity, but it demonstrated a level of access inappropriate for his role. B. Deleted messages. The more critical discovery came from the victim's devices, not Holt's. Zaria had screenshots of messages Holt deleted on his device, missed calls at late hours, unsent voice messages he attempted to send, notes he left in her locker. Even more importantly, forensic specialists pulled fragments of data from Naomi's and Amara's old phone backups, data that had been overlooked years before. They recovered partial text strings from Holt, phrases such as "come to my office," deleted call logs, calendar invites marked as mentorship. None of the recovered messages explicitly revealed sexual content or threats, but they confirmed secret communication, improper access, and patterned behavior. C. Recorded audio. The statement that changed everything. The recording Zaria captured in the stairwell became the strongest digital piece. His voice on record saying, "You're letting the wrong people talk to you. You need to come see me before things go bad." It wasn't a direct threat, but it provided tone, intent, dominance, pressure, evidence of coercion, evidence of concealment. For prosecutors, tone often matters more than explicit language. The recording established. He was aware she was speaking to someone. He was attempting to regain control. He was concerned about consequences. He was actively pressuring her. It became a pillar of the prosecution. 2. Forensic evidence, physical pieces that built the case. A. DNA evidence. When investigators collected evidence from the Coleman residence on December 6th, they found a partial fingerprint smeared on the hallway wall, skin cells on the cracked phone case, a hair strand near the bedroom doorway. The fingerprint was inconclusive due to smudging, but the DNA on the phone case and hair sample matched Holt. Defense attorneys later argued the DNA transfer could have occurred at school, but prosecutors argued the location and timing made that impossible. Zaria didn't bring her phone to Holt's office after November 3rd, confirmed by attendance logs and security footage. The presence of his DNA on her cracked case, found several feet from where she collapsed, supported forced contact, or at minimum, proximity during the confrontation. B. GPS tracking. In addition to phone pings, detectives obtained supplemental GPS data from tollway cameras, traffic light sensors, license plate readers, business parking lot cameras. They mapped Holt's route minute by minute. His car was traced from school, a detour away from his normal commuting path, the Coleman neighborhood, a rapid departure at 7:47 p.m., a return trajectory toward his home region. This map became a visual centerpiece during prosecution. C. Home scene evidence. Inside the house, investigators documented a knocked-over lamp, a partial shoe drag pattern, light scuff marks on the hallway floor, a shifted dresser, a journal pulled halfway from under the bed, the open front door, no fingerprints other than family. Members were found on doorknobs, which prosecutors believed indicated Holt used gloves. but the forensic consistency of displaced items suggested a brief struggle. 3. Testimonial evidence, voices that filled the gaps. A. The janitor's statement. The janitor provided the observation of Naomi crying, Holt shutting the door abruptly, Holt telling him to focus on your duties, a memory of Naomi appearing distressed after meetings. He had never reported it because Holt was his direct superior. But the fact he remembered it with specific details gave the statement weight. B. The school nurse's statement. She described both Naomi and Amara having the same symptoms, both going for external testing, Holt approving all medical absences, Holt intercepting certain health records. Her testimony confirmed that the symptoms were not random, and that Holt involved himself in their medical affairs in a way no administrator should. C. Counselor statements. 3 counselors, including Ms. Reeves, provided statements showing Holt's unusual access, unscheduled meetings, lack of documentation, excessive interest in certain students, attempts to check counseling records. These statements were critical to establishing behavior inconsistent with his professional role. 4. Medical evidence, where the case turned criminal. A. Holt's own clinic records. With a medical warrant, detectives retrieved his 2018 HIV diagnosis, his refusal to attend follow-up counseling, his acknowledgement form stating legal responsibility to disclose his status to partners, his prescription history, his medical visits in another county to avoid recognition. The form he signed, acknowledging disclosure obligations, became the foundation for the knowingly infecting minors charge. B. Victims' medical records. Naomi and Amara had records showing symptoms consistent with early infection, missed appointments, confidential testing, no parental notification due to medical privacy laws in the state. Their records overlapped in ways too specific to explain away. Zaria's September 2023 diagnosis completed the pattern. 3 minors, same infection, same timeline pattern, same adult contact. For prosecutors, this was direct causation. 5. Behavioral and timeline evidence, the pattern that could not be dismissed. Behavioral experts were brought in to analyze his grooming patterns, his method of isolating victims, his escalation timeline, his surveillance of Zaria, his panic behaviors, his attempts to erase digital traces. They concluded he displays a clear pattern of predatory behavior rooted in power imbalance, access to victims, and emotional manipulation, followed by a shift to intimidation and control once exposure becomes likely. This expert testimony reinforced the prosecution's narrative. This was not negligence. This was strategy. 6. School records, where his authority was documented. Investigators retrieved his office access logs, his keycard swipes, attendance records of all 3 victims, notes he filed on mentorship sessions, emails he sent late at night, overrides he placed on student schedules, visitors' logs showing him staying late on days he met with the victims. They found 22 undocumented meetings with Naomi, 19 undocumented meetings with Amara, 31 undocumented meetings with Zaria. Records should have existed. None did. For prosecutors, this became evidence of deliberate concealment. The charges, the full list. Based on all collected evidence, the state filed the following charges. 1. 2 counts of homicide for the deaths of Naomi Sanders, Amara Lewis, originally ruled accidental, now connected to deliberate action. 2. 1 count of attempted homicide for the December 6th attack on Zaria Coleman. Her survival made the charge possible. 3. 3 counts of unlawful relations with minors, documented through coaching records, access logs, student statements, medical patterns. The victims' ages fell under the legal threshold in the state. 4. Knowingly infecting minors, the strongest medical charge. It relied on his 2018 disclosure form, his clinic refusal, his prescription records, the victims' positive tests. Medical experts confirmed the timeline of infection aligned with his behavior. 5. Abuse of authority. For exploiting his position as principal, mentor, administrator, district representative. This charge addresses the misuse of institutional power. 6. Tampering with evidence for deleting messages, erasing school files, interfering with attendance logs, attempting to conceal his presence at victim homes. Digital forensics confirmed intentional deletion. March 2025. By the time the courtroom doors opened, every seat was already filled. Teachers, former students, counselors, church members, parents from neighboring towns, everyone wanted to hear the testimony of the only girl who survived long enough to speak for the two who never got the chance. When Zariah Coleman walked to the stand, she didn't look like the trembling teenager rescued from her bedroom floor months earlier. She looked older, worn by everything she carried, but steady enough to speak. The prosecutor asked her to recount her entire timeline with Holt, from the very first disciplinary meeting. She described the shift from school discipline to private conversations, the subtle ways he monitored her, the pressure disguised as mentorship, the pregnancy she tried to hide, the clinic visit in September 2023, the diagnosis that changed everything, the fear that grew after Naomi and Amara's deaths, the day she started documenting everything. Her voice never shook, even when describing being followed, receiving late-night messages, or nearly collapsing from panic the day she wrote, "If anything happens to me," he did it, on the note she gave Ms. Reeves. Then the prosecutor asked, "What made you come forward?" She didn't hesitate. "Because I lived. They didn't." For a moment, the courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Two girls, once treated as unrelated tragedies, were now united through her testimony. Her 3-hour testimony became the backbone of the prosecution. Not because she was dramatic, because she was consistent, because she had documentation, because she had survived long enough to name the pattern adults overlooked. Now everything depended on whether the jury believed a teenage girl over a respected principal with a spotless public reputation. Throughout the trial, Dr. Laverian Holt kept the same posture, back straight, chin high, hands folded. Not once did he turn to acknowledge the victims' families. Not once did he react when the recording of his own voice was played for the jury. When he finally testified, he attempted to frame himself as misunderstood. He claimed his interactions were mentorship. The girls misinterpreted support. Their medical diagnoses were tragically coincidental. The investigation was a misjudgment built on panic. But his explanations cracked under cross-examination. Prosecutors displayed his 2018 HIV disclosure form, the GPS map placing him near all 3 girls at key times, records of secret meetings, deleted messages, testimony from school staff, Zariah's evidence folder, his DNA recovered from the Coleman residence. On the final day of deliberation, after nearly 8 hours, the jury returned. Verdict: guilty on all major counts, including 2 counts of homicide, 1 count of attempted homicide, 3 counts unlawful relations with minors, knowingly infecting minors, abuse of authority, tampering with evidence. Holt didn't look at the jury. He didn't look at the judge. He didn't look at anyone. He stared forward, expression blank, as if waiting for something he already knew was coming. 2 months later, sentencing was held. The judge described Holt's actions as one of the most calculated abuses of authority this court has ever seen. After reviewing victim impact statements, medical evidence, and the pre-sentencing investigation, the judge delivered a sentence designed to reflect each level of harm. Sentence: life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for the 2 homicide convictions, served consecutively. 40 years for attempted homicide, 25 years for knowingly infecting minors, 15 years each for unlawful relations with minors, 10 years for abuse of authority, 10 years for tampering with evidence. Total, life plus 115 years. He will never be eligible for release. Holt showed no reaction, not a flinch, not a raised eyebrow, just the same blank stare he held the day the investigation began. After sentencing, The district implemented immediate policy changes. Mandatory two-staff rule. For student meetings, digital logging of all mentorship sessions, external oversight of student wellness programs, mandatory annual boundary training, stricter reporting pathways for suspicious patterns. Parents across the county pushed for broader reforms. Some joined committees. Some contacted lawmakers. Some simply admitted they never realized how much trust they placed in schools. Trust they now viewed through a different lens. Zaria began long-term counseling. Her mother attended every session. Her brother waited in the lobby each time, asking only if she was coming home soon. Healing was not fast, but it was happening. For Naomi and Amara, memorial scholarships were created. One for arts, one for STEM. Their photos were displayed during School Safety Awareness Month, not as reminders of tragedy, but as reminders of the responsibility adults hold. 3 girls entered the same mentorship program. Only one walked out to tell the world what happened inside it. If you were the parent of any of these girls, which part of this case would stay with you long after the verdict?